how can these two be divorced from each other? How could these two be at loggerheads with each other? So again, in Islamic literature, economy is the science of earning and provisioning, how people earn their livelihoods by drawing upon the bounties of nature. So economy was dependent upon ecology. And this was not, so a study of economics without an appreciation and a study of ecology is absurd almost. And of course, this is something that we struggle with a lot today. Also, we had the twin pillars of a traditional Muslim society, which is the mosque and the market. So the mosque is considered the devotional commons. Anyone can go to pray, find a spot, sit there all day. No one can ask you to leave. No one can ask, Similarly, the market is part of the transactional commons. Anyone can go into the market with goods that they have produced or with firewood that they have gathered from the commons and be able to sell that. So really the quote was, the market of the Muslims is like the place of worship of the worshippers. Whoever proceeds to a spot in it, it is hers or his for the day until she or he departs from it. Also, markets were often responsible for endowments. So markets, the money that came off of markets usually paid for hospitals, for schools, for animal shelters. So these were really the two twin pillars of the Muslim community, and there's extensive jurisprudential work on both worship in the mosque and also transactions in the market. These aren't separated from each other, or there's no duality between the spirit and the material. And then we want to come back to the work for the charitable endowments. I'm trying to go fast, so there's a lot, so I hope if I'm going too fast, please slow me down. But
slow down a little.
All right. Okay. All right. So really, what was the fulfillment of Fard al-Kifaya, which is sufficing the community, or the realization of the common good. And endowments, the charitable endowments, were really a cornerstone for establishing vibrant communities. Why? Because civil society, as defined by the London School of Economics, is, what is that? I have the definition here, so let me pull it up for you. But civil society is really the, one moment, I don't want to get this wrong. It refers to the arena of uncoerced collective action around shared interests, purposes, and values, right?
Yes.
So this would involve institutional forms that are distinct from the centralizing state. So whereas today, where we think about meeting the needs of our nation, we think about the government. But really, a strong civil society takes that, does not surrender that communal obligation, and takes that really back into its own hands, into its own control, into its own power. And what the central government, or what the state becomes responsible for, is establishing the macro framework that allows for such communally based institutions to function to their fullest. So what I'm trying to say here is endowments providing the creative space for communities to micromanage their own socio-economic affairs autonomously through communal responsibility. So they're aloof from the centralized and centralizing political apparatus of the impersonal state. And civil society, then, in Islam, is a living existential realization of, like what I said, the communal obligation, or the duty of sufficing the community. And it's really about placing people, communities, and their ecosystems back into the center of socioeconomic thinking and socioeconomic planning. So what we really have is I know there's a lot of talk about Islamic finance and Islamic banking, and I don't want to discredit anything, but what I mean to say is that really belongs to a neoliberal, corporate, usurious financial framework. It does not fit into, it does not,
you're really fixed on it.
It does not fit into communally based, it does not fit into that structure at all. It does not fit into the structure of a community. That is modifying, that is structurally subverting ethics and laws to fit into a what I said, neoliberal, corporate, usurious financial structure. So really, the true economic system that is traditional, that is people-based and community-based, it is inherently and self-consciously civil societal in nature. And it is geared towards the socioeconomic equity of all people. So it is an economy of the common good. And what WAQF, or the charitable endowment, does, just like if economy is the law of the household, and we know we all come from families, if we have a member of the family that is sick or ailing, or in some way less abled because of age or ability, that person is usually centered. That person doesn't have to do anything. The people who are able and the people who are well will go out and do work and bring things back for these members of the family who are not as who don't have the same opportunities. Similarly, if we think about society as a household, then the weak and the marginalized really should be at the center of this household. They should not be the neglected, forgotten, but they should be at the center. And those who have, their primary concern really has to be the have-nots, to the provision, the providing of the necessities of life to the have-nots, or to those who do not have the same ability or the opportunity to gain what they need. So when we think about charitable endowments, we have to also, there are some questions to ask. Would it just operate as a charitable trust? If we think about reclaiming that, reclaiming the WAQF, reclaiming, you could very well grow up in a Muslim society at some point when it was at its, when it was doing better than they're doing now. And grow up in be born in a hospital that was run by an endowment. And then go to a school that is run by an endowment. And then perhaps work in a union that's run by an endowment, and then perhaps get married in a wearing a gown that was purchased or borrowed from an endowment, and then die and have your funeral be executed by an endowment. Your whole life could be endowed. And of course, we're so far from that institutional infrastructure at the moment. But if we really thought about reclaiming that infrastructure, is it possible to do that in a not just formalistic way, but really, like, what are the questions that we need to ask? And so these are some of the questions that I have here. Is it just an alternative to a charitable trust? Can thinking about economics that way provide a systemic and structural alternative to neoliberal privatization? Can we think about it doing more than just being a charitable trust? And does it entail a macroeconomic framework, which may be called the gift economy or the civic economy, that runs counter to the global dominance of neoliberal capitalism, led by free-floating, ruthless transnational corporations and banks that are disembedded from the livelihoods of local communities? So, of course, these questions can be answered either way, but these are important questions. If WAQF or endowments have to find their real creative value and purpose in our current context. I'm very much running out of time, so I'm going to pass quickly. So John Ruskin, some beginning of, just an introduction. He was a critic, he was a philosopher, thinker, laid the foundation for the arts and crafts movement, deeply influenced Tolstoy, William Morris, and Gandhi. And he really talks about wealth radiant and wealth reflective. So wealth radiant, he says that the big error of economists is like that of the astronomer who attempts to study the planet with no reference to the stars. So there is wealth radiant, which is like the stars. It has intrinsic vitality. It radiates and it enables life. And then you have wealth reflective, which is like the planet. It represents intrinsic wealth. It is not wealth in and of itself. It represents wealth. And it may be the system of tokens for the purpose of exchange. He talks about the economic man. Of course, he critiques the economic man, who is motivated, basically a human being, a being that does invariably does that by which he may obtain the greatest amount of necessities, conveniences, and luxuries with the smallest quantity of labor and physical self-denial with which they can be obtained in the existing state of knowledge. Pretty lazy person, basically, who wants the greatest amount of benefit that they can acquire. And this economic man, first of all, I would like to bring to our attention the terminology here. It's the economic man. Of course, woman has nothing to do with this. And you know, there was the surge of negative masculinity, which kind of started to become rather evident in all developing fields of knowledge at the time when this was happening. Of course, takes its shape and form in economics as well, because necessary acts to life, like nurturing, caring, etc., don't feature at all in economic jargon. And anyway, so the economic man is motivated by nothing but the desire for material gain. And is that what a human being really is? Okay, I can understand that a human being can be selfish, can be greedy, but I also refuse to believe that a human being cannot be equally selfless or much more selfless, much more just, much more capable of love and generosity. So if an economic theory is really only focusing on the worst possibilities of a human being and not what is possible, the higher possibilities of being human, I don't know how we can establish civilization on that.
Right on. Yeah.
So he talks about social affection. He talks about one thing that political economy completely, modern political economy, not political economy in its true sense of the term, but the modern understanding of political economy completely neglects social affection. Because social affections are disturbing elements, you know, cannot be relied on. But what we can rely on is avarice and the desire for progress. These are constant. And because social affections are accidental, they must completely be removed from consideration. Ruskin insists that the soul is the motive force of the human being. And it's brought to its greatest strength by its proper fuel, namely affections. So the greatest work cannot be accomplished by money or by putting pressure on someone, but if one can really inspire in that person their will and the strength of their will and the strength of their spirit, and that can only happen when there's affection. So affection is not a mathematical addition that you can make to the rest of the economist's considerations. It's a chemical, it changes everything. It's a chemical introduction. It changes the whole nature of the conversation. And it therefore falsifies the whole science. And he talks about honor. So why is it that commerce was less honorable than medicine or than ministry? Because disinterested service has always been mutually, by consensus, recognized as a hallmark of honor. When someone is disinterestedly serving in the service of others, they deserve honor. But as to the degree to which they are motivated primarily by personal gain, the less deserving of honor consensually, this is human society, consensually honors those professions, those people less. So Ruskin thinks that this is a mistake to think that self-sacrifice and disinterested service should not be part of commerce. The need for a commerce that is not exclusively selfish is very high, because the market, it has its own martyrdoms. There is the valor in commerce is possible, just like it is possible on the battlefield, just like it's possible. I have a quote here from Ruskin that I would like to. In true commerce, as in true preaching or true fighting, it is necessary to admit the idea of occasional voluntary loss. Money has to be lost, as well as lives, that the market may have its martyrdoms just as well as the pulpit, and trade its heroisms just as well as war. If this is not common, it is because men and women of heroic temper have always been misguided in their youth into other fields, not recognizing what is in our days perhaps the most important of all fields. And he talks about the family ethics of the state, and I will not get too much into that at the moment, but it's a mistake to isolate the individual from the society because survival is really grounded in interdependence. And he talks about the science of getting rich, which is really two things. One, the science of keeping your neighbor poor, and two, power over labor. So money is not, the force of money in my pocket is entirely contingent upon the absence of that money in someone else's pocket.
Yes.
If nobody needed my money would have no use. So the art of making myself rich is the art of keeping someone else poor. And also, I could have an estate, but if I don't have labor, the estate is no good to me. So accumulation of property is of no use, really, to the owner, unless it comes with it power over men and women and all kinds of people. So power over labor is highly desirable and highly necessary to the enjoyment of wealth. And it also has a directly proportional relationship to the poverty of the people over whom it is exercised. So he talks about other ways of thinking about power. So money power, which can work, but there are times when it doesn't work, like when we have strikes and when we have, even though we have the money, we have a lot of people who don't have the money who are not willing to obey us. So when that money loses its apparent power, what good is that money really? So we talk about moral power, which is really when people love you. And people are willing to do things for you because you did the right thing for them. And because you will do the right thing for everyone. And that is moral power. And that is just as, if not more powerful than money power. And he talks about if wealth is really the exertion of power over people, then if the people over whom you are able to exert power, or whom you are able to influence and guide and lead, are noble people, are virtuous people, then isn't your power greater? So why he says this is because if the state desires to be more powerful, it should be primarily concerned with creating noble, virtuous human beings whom it can direct for great good. And then aren't people themselves the wealth? Considering, if wealth is power over people, perhaps it is people who are the real wealth. And perhaps the final outcome and consummation of wealth lies in creating the circumstances for people to be bright-eyed and happy and whole and intelligent and happy and virtuous and powerful. So we also have the idea of just wealth and unjust wealth. So wealth that is created by just means and wealth that is created by unjust means. And seeking unjust wealth in his terms is like seeking death. And I will proceed because of time. But really, the centrality of justice, right? Because wealth can be just and wealth can be unjust. If wealth, a mass of money that was acquired by destruction, is that good wealth? But we can also have wealth that is acquired by creation. So wealth through destruction or wealth through creation. What kind of wealth has its own algebraic equation to it. Just like a numerical value, 2 is plus 2 or minus 2. So similarly, wealth can be really judged in similar ways. Was it destructive? Is it founded upon destruction or is it founded upon creation? And healing, he says, is possible only by means of justice. No love, no faith, no hope will do it. People will be unwisely fond and vainly faithful unless they are just. And though absolute justice be unattainable, as much justice as we need for all practical use is attainable by those who make it their aim. I'm going to move forward. This is different, of course. course, from socialism, because he's not trying to get us all to get rid of work altogether. We're not moving towards rest. Work is essential to the human condition. It is both a luxury and a necessity. And equality, absolute equality, may be impossible, but the inevitable inequality which will exist in society as long as the world is. The question is it justly established or unjustly established? He says the poor have no right to the property of the rich, but also the rich have no right to the property of the poor. So wealth is really all useful and agreeable objects which possess exchangeable value. And basically, really, when you redefine, this is how it's defined. When we redefine wealth, the possession of the valuable by the valiant. And capital, which our economy is very obsessed with, the multiplication and aggregation of capital. Capital is not an end in itself, right? It's the beginning of something. It is the root. And it has to bear leaves, and it has to bear fruit. And then, of course, one day the seed of that fruit will bring out root again. But it's only capital when it's producing something other than itself. And consumption is then the crown of production. And the wealth of a nation is to be estimated by what they consume. What kind of food? Is it organic? Is it healthy? How was it produced? What went into its labor? How happy are those who labored over it? And as consumption is perhaps, in his words, in his terms, the end of production, so is life the end of consumption. How life-giving is what we are producing? Is it life-giving or is it not life-giving? So the maximum of life can only be reached by the maximum of virtue. And when we refuse food to the poor, we refuse them also wisdom, virtue, and salvation. And I know this, it sounds very preachy, but I know this because I work on the south side of Chicago, and it has a reputation, and it's not a fairly established reputation. Because when we have refused people the very basics of everything, the very primary basic opportunities, and then we want to judge them for how they act, I don't know that that's a fair judgment. So, finally, I want to get back into what I was just talking about, which is the work on the south side of Chicago. So, there is a community organization called IMAN, which is the Inner City Muslim Action Network. And it's a community organization that is focused on fostering health, wellness, and healing in the inner city. And it does that by doing a few things. One, running provision of healthcare services for the underinsured or the uninsured. Two, organizing for change, so advocacy, doing advocacy, and also organizing the community for change. Three, we do re-entry, so people who are returning citizens who have spent 20, 30 years in the penitentiary and are coming out with no sort of access to life anymore, really, when things have changed so much in the 20, 30 years that they were gone. And also high-risk youth who are under-resourced and don't really have the opportunities that I had, and that many of us have. So we work with these returning citizens and under-resourced youth to provide a path to, to well-being and to success. And then also we do work with arts and culture. So here's just a little bit about the reason I bring this up is because this is far from perfect, and this is nearly not, representative of everything that was talked about before this, but it just gives, to translate all those things into the real world, it would take a lot of time and it would take a lot of effort, and this is just one such effort. So here, this is our community health center, and I mentioned that social affection is a really important piece, and here we really try to demonstrate, and actually, that people's lives are valuable, that we care about their interests, and that we establish as many personal direct relationships and connections as we can. This is the north side, where you see there's one vacant lot, 2 corner stores, and 6 retail establishments. This is the south side, 111 abandoned buildings, 240 vacant lots, 7 corner stores, and 1 food retail establishment. It's not easy to make sense of why this is so different. You know, why is this disinvestment okay? And I could show you a little bit about the work, but I think I will stop here. Just you can look at these pictures. So one thing I would say is, you know, we have this Refresh the Hood campaign where we go around in Ramadan and work with corner stores to provide people who are passing by or just people in the neighborhood with fresh foods and fresh smoothies. And the whole idea is to create that vibrant exchange in a community. The corner store campaign is a good example of the martyrdom of the market, because here we're really trying to get the corner stores to change their economic model, change their business model. They think that selling alcohol and junk food is most profitable for them. And perhaps in the way they know how to play the game, perhaps it is. But we try to demonstrate and we try to prove that it's possible to actually do what is good for the people and good for the community and still make your profit. So the corner store campaign really is like a 10-step, a 10-step procedure that helps corner store owners to change their business model from models that are racially problematic, but also that sell alcohol, that sell junk food, and do not provide the community with fresh, healthy foods, to a model that actually enables them to be providers of fresh, healthy foods and develop social affection with their neighbors. We also run a farmers market. We have a healthy marketplace vision, so we're saying here, okay, we're going around and talking to 20 corner stores and asking them to change their business model. How about we show them how we can do it? So we're trying to create a marketplace, it's in the works, it's not developed yet, but a marketplace that will be a training site, a model for how a inner city corner store can become a hub for creative placemaking. How can it be a hub for healthy living? So these are just some plans that we have to revitalize this part of this is 63rd and Racine, to revitalize this corridor. Just things that a community needs, things that other communities have, that some communities don't have. And just trying to put our heads together, trying to arrive and establish those necessities. And we have Green Reentry. This is the program I mentioned where we take foreclosed lots and we rehab them. And I will stop here because this is not the moment to do. All these three things are not exactly connected to each other, but why I bring them up here is to demonstrate that our economics and our economic thinking has to center people and has to center communities and it has to center ecosystems. Because this is, at the end of the day, this is what it's all for. Thanks.